A pleasant day to each and everyone. I am Liza Montejo and I am one of the members of Group 7 with a given topic, Chapter 14, Fraud and Error. So before we start discussing Chapter 14, let us go back to the previous chapters where we tackled that corporate governance is the process by which an entities and other stakeholders exert authorities or control to a certain organization through execution of responsibilities and accompanying accountability. Chapter 14 focuses on describing fraud risks and errors and how these two can be lessened if not totally avoided by having effective internal control, which is a tool of a good corporate governance. Now, let us discuss what is fraud. Fraud is an intentional act of involving the use of deception that results in a material misstatements of the financial statements. Meaning to say, it is the unethical actions that is intentionally done by someone in a certain organization and maybe the organization itself. Fraud is not that easy to discover, especially in an organization, because there are times that the brain of the fraud is those who has the powerful authority in an organization. Fraud can also affect many individuals including customers or clients, investors, lenders, employees, and other stakeholders. And it can also ruin the reputation of someone or the organization itself and may lead to a bankruptcy. Fraud is usually happened in an accounting or in a financial department as most corporate fraud schemes are highly complicated accounting schemes used to inflate companies' apparent profits and may take years to detect. An example, one of the most corporate fraud cases is Wirecard, a financial services company which is a payment, transfer, and processing company in Germany. In 2020, accounting auditors discovered a whopping of $2 billion discrepancy between the company's books and the actual money. In that case, Wirecard was forced to declare bankruptcy and its CEO was arrested by German authorities. Another example is the most trend fraud case in the Philippines, which is all about PhilHealth. It says there that officials of the embattled Philippine Health Insurance Corporation have stolen some 15 billion pesos from its agency using different fraud schemes. And now let us determine the difference between fraud and error. Intent to deceive is what distinguishes fraud from errors. Auditors routinely find financial errors in their client books, but those errors are not intentional. To elaborate, fraud is committing something that is intentional, while error is not. And now, let us tackle the two types of misstatements that are relevant to auditors' consideration of fraud. These are misstatements arising from misappropriation of assets and misstatements arising from fraudulent financial reporting. And now, what is misstatements arising from misappropriation of assets? Asset misappropriation occurs when a perpetrator or an individual that carries out harmful or illegal acts steals or misuses an organization assets. It is a dominant fraud scheme perpetrated against small businesses and mostly employees are the perpetrators. Also, asset misappropriations can be observed in various ways, such as embezzling cash receipts, stealing assets, or causing the company to pay goods or services that were not received. And let us now determine when asset misappropriation commonly happen. It commonly occurs when, first, when employees gain access to cash and manipulate accounts to cover up cash thefts. Second, when employees manipulate cash disbursement through the companies. And lastly, when employees steal inventory or other assets and manipulate the financial records to cover up the fraud. And now, let us discuss the other type of misstatements, which is misstatements arising from misappropriation of fraudulent financial reporting. Fraudulent financial reporting is the intentional manipulation of reported financial results to misstate the economic condition of an organization. The perpetrator seeks gain through the rise in stock price and through his or her personal increase in wealth. There are circumstances that the perpetrator doesn't seek for his or her personal benefits but instead uses fraudulent financial reporting to help or to save the organization in bankruptcy and in having loss in financial outcome. Fraudulent financial reporting takes place through first, manipulation, falsification, or alteration of accounting records or supporting documents. Next, misinterpretation or omission of events, transactions, or other significant information. Lastly, intentional misapplication of accounting principles. In example, an accountant applied cash basis instead of accrual in recording transaction, even though he or she knows that the accrual is the basis that their company follow. And that's all. Thank you.
Good day everyone, I am Laika Joy Dimasagnay. So in this lesson, we will tackle about the fraud triangle. So let's start with who came up with this idea. It is Bernard Crusay. He is a criminologist who found out that there are three factors that exist when fraud occurs. He believes that if one of these factors are not in place, the fraud cannot occur. So, the fraud triangle simply consists of three elements that enables fraud to exist. And when these factors are all present, of course, there is a very high risk that the fraud will occur. Now, let's walk through to these three elements. We have incentive, opportunity, and rationalization. First is incentive or pressure to commit fraud. For the fraudster, there must be a benefit to them, whether it's directly or indirectly, since there is a big risk in performing this act. Or maybe there must be the pressure that gives them and influence them to commit these fraud acts. Examples of incentives relating to asset misappropriation includes personal factors such as financial consideration. Yung mga taong may chance mag-commit ng fraud or may potential to commit fraud, ito yung mga taong may matinding pangangailangan sa buhay, tulad na lang ng pera. Halimbawa, isa sa mga mahal nila sa buhay may sakit at kailangan operahan, which is cost of $500,000 or more than $1 million. At sa paggawa nila ng fraud, makakapag-opera yung mahal nila sa buhay. Ito yung mga taong kapit sa patalim at gagawin nila lahat, diba? Next is pressure from family, friends, or the culture to live more lavish lifestyles than one's personal earnings allow for. Ito yung mga nakikita mo sa mga social media. Ito yung mga nakikita mo sa paligid mo, kung saan anuman ang mga pangangailangan nila, anuman ang kagustuhan nila, ay nabibilyan nila agad. Diba? Kung saan, nagkakaroon ka ng inggit na dapat gusto mo, ganun din yung buhay ko. Kaya sa pag-commit mo ng fraud, alam mo gaganda yung buhay mo kasi malaki yung makukuha mong pera. Kaya gagawin mo. Next is addiction to gambling or drugs. Once na na-addict ka sa isang bagay, gagawin mo lahat makuha lang yung bagay na yun, especially drugs. Kahit magkano pa yan, kahit ano pang gawin mo, kahit fraud pa yung gagawin mo, makuha ka lang ng drugs. Next is addiction to gambling, diba? Gustong-gusto mo na magsugal, or it's either nabaon ka na ng utang kakasugal mo, so sinisingil ka na ng mga napag-utangan mo, at syempre, naisip mo yung fraud na makapagsolusyon para mabayaran yung utang mo. Next is incentives relating to fraudulent financial reporting. Management compensation schemes. So kasi minsan sa fraud, hindi yan lagi ako. ako na gumawa ay siya ding utak ng paggawa, 'di ba? Minsan napag-utusan ka lang. Next is incentives that relating to fraudulent financial reporting. Management compensation schemes. Halimbawa na lang, yung mas mataas na position sa'yo, sinabi niya kapag ginawa mo to, dadagdagan ko yung sahod mo. 'Di ba? Kasi hindi lahat ng gumagawa ng fraud, sila yung utak ng paggawa ng fraud. 'Di ba? Minsan sila lang yung mga kamay, napag-utusan lang sila at binigyan lang sila ng kapalit na pag ginawa mo to, may bibigyan kita ng dagdag sahod, di ba? Next is other financial pressures for either improves earnings or improved balance sheet. Ito yung mga dinuduga, yung mga financial reports. Bakit? Kapag dinuduga nila yung financial report, yung mga sobrang pera doon, mapupunta sa kanila. Next is debt covenants. Gagawin mo lahat, mabayaran lang yung utang mo. So, dudugain mo lahat, diba? Next is pending retirement or stock operation expirations. Ito yung mga specific na dinuduga kapag sa mga financial reports, yung mga stock options expirations, yung mga halimbawa, may binayaran na keme-keme, pero wala naman talaga, hindi naman yung nag-exist. Kasi, napunta doon sa taong gumawa nun. Next is personal wealth tied to either financial resource or survival of the company. So, halimbawa, isa ka sa mga employee ng kumpanya at nakita mong pabaksak na ang company. Dudugain mo lahat para umunlad yung company. Bakit? Kapag nawala yung company, paano ka kikita, di ba? Saan ka pupulutin, di ba? So, iisipin mo na lang na sa pagduduga mo nung mga financial resources, financial reporting na yun is uunlad din yung buhay mo kasi hindi ka mawawalan ng trabaho kapag hindi nawala yung company. Next is greed. Ayan, sakim. Sakim sa pera. Hindi na sila nakokontento. Ano man ang meron sila, mas gusto nilang higitan kung ano pa yung meron sila. The second element in the fraud triangle is opportunities to commit fraud. Opportunities serve as the fundamental in fraud. If fraud is going to happen, there must be opportunity for it to happen. It is obvious that everyone has the opportunity to commit fraud. Pero it's more than that. Hindi porket may pagkakataon ka ay gagawin mo ng fraud. It must be, meron ka ng pagkakataon na gawin yung fraud and meron pang mababang chance na mahuli ka. And what is the main reason kung bakit nagkakaroon ng opportunity ang mga tao to commit fraud? It's because of the lack of internal controls of the management. So here are some specific examples of opportunities in committing fraud. First, we have significant related party transactions. Second, a company industry position, such as the ability to dictate terms or conditions to suppliers or customers that might allow individuals to structure fraudulent transactions. Then we have the third one, management inconsistency involving subjective judgment regarding asset or accounting estimates. The fourth one is simple transactions that are made complex to run an unusual recording process. Fifth one, complex or difficult to understand transactions such as financial derivatives or special purpose entities. The sixth is ineffective monitoring of management by the board, either because the board of directors is not independent or effective, or because there is a domineering manager. The seventh one is complex or unstable organization structure. The last one is weak or non-existent internal control. The third element in the fraud triangle is rationalizing the fraud. Rationalization is what fraudsters doing in their minds to convince themselves that it is okay to commit the fraud. They must have the attitude to commit this act. So here are some examples in asset misappropriation and what is the main reason kung bakit ginagawa ito ng mga tao. So yung main reason dito is feel nila mali yung trato sa kanila ng kumpanya or it's either mali talaga yung pagtrato nung kumpanya sa kanila. Feel nila the company owns me. Binabayaran nila ako ng hindi ko worth. Yung binibigay kong service, yung binibigay nilang sahod, hindi tumutugma yun. 'Di ba? So, here are some specific examples. So, first is fraud is justified to save a family member or loved one from financial crisis. So, iniisip nila na kahit makagawa ko ng fraud na to, maliligtas yung buhay ng mahal ko na may sakit or nung may pangangailangan. Next, we will lose everything, family, home, car, and so on. If we don't take the money, so iniisip nila, mawawalan kami, diba? So kailangan ko to talagang gawin, mawawala yung pamilya ko, mawawalan ng buhay, mawawala lahat sa akin. Kaya gagawin ko yung fraud. So next is, no help is available from outside. Iniisip nila na walang taong makakatulong sa kanila at ang iniisip nilang solusyon sa problema nila na hindi nila kayang gawin is fraud lang, 'di ba? Or maybe humingi sila ng tulong sa iba like nag-try sila mag-reach out sa family nila pero hindi sila natulungan kasi syempre meron din pangangailangan siguro yung hininga nila ng tulong, 'di ba? Or it's either humingi naman sila ng tulong sa bangko pero dinecline yung hinihingi nila. Diba? Next is, this is borrowing. And we intended to pay the stolen money back at some point. Hindi, hihiramin ko lang to, saglit lang. Ibabalik ko din to. Diba? Pag nakita na ulit, ibabalik ko lahat ng mga hiniram ko, dadagdagan ko pa, yung mga ganong mindset, diba? Next, something is owned by the company because others are treated better. Iisipin nila na, hindi, may utang sa akin yung kumpanya. Kaya sa paggagawa ko ng fraud na to, is mababayaran nila yung utang nila sa akin. Ganon. Kasi mas, meron silang favoritism. Binabayaran nila ng malaki yung isa, wala namang ginagawa. Ako na laging gumagawa, ganto, ganyan. Hindi naman ako nababayaran ng tama. So, worth it naman yung paggawa ko ng fraud, diba? Kasi, mababayaran yun nila ako ng utang, diba? Next is, we simply do not care about the consequences of our actions or of accepted motion of decency and trust. We are for ourselves. So ito yung mga taong wala talaga silang pakialam ano man ang maging consequence nung kakaharapin nila kahit gumawa sila ng masama. May mga gantong tao, totoo, may nag-i-exist na wala silang pakialam kahit anong gawin nilang masama. Ang mahalaga, kapag ginawa ko to, may benefit ako. Ayun. So next naman is yung mga example natin for fraudulent financial reporting naman, 'di ba? Ito naman, ang main reason dito is iniisip nila na maliligtas nila yung kumpanya kapag ginawa nila yung fraud na yon, or it's either may greed, 'di ba? Ito na nga yung sakim sa pera, gusto ko lang ng pera, dumami yung pera ko, ganon. So here are the specific example. This is one-time thing to get us through the current crisis and survive until things get better. So, iniisip nila kapag ginawa nila yung fraud is maliligtas nila yung kumpanya at gagawin lang nila ito ng once at di na nila uulitin basta makalago at muling lumago yung kumpanya na pinagtatrabahuan nila. Meron kayong nakikita sa mga K-drama, sa mga palabas, diba? Yung merong mayayaman na may mga ginagawa silang fraudulent action and fraudulent act just to save their company, diba? Ayan yung number 1 na iniisip nila. Next, as number 2, everybody cheats on the financial statement a little. We are just playing the same game. So, ayan. Nalaman nila na yung ibang kumpanya na nanduduga din naman. Hindi rin naman sila nahuli, diba? So, why not? Why not kami din manduga? Unti lang naman yung dudugain namin, hindi naman malaki. Ganon. Mga ganyan talaga. Next, we will be in a violation of all debt covenants unless we will find a way to get this step off the financial statements. Iisipin nila na parurusahan sila lang matindi ng mga pinagkakautangan nila. O kaya merong binigay na death threat. Kaya lalo silang nagpo-push through. Ito yung nagbibigay sa kanila ng pressure. Kaya iniisip nila, hindi. Maliligtas ko yung buhay ko at mababayaran ko yung pinagkakautangan ko sa pamamagitan ng paggawa ng fraud. Then, we have lastly na example is, we need a higher stock price to acquire the company XYZ or to keep our employees through stock options and so forth. Hindi. Marami akong maliligtas na mga manggagawa dito na pamilya. Kasi kapag hindi bumaksak yung company na to at napaunlad pa namin at nakabili pa kami ng, maka-acquire pa kami ng ibang company, is lalago yung mga pinagkakitaan ng mga employee niya. Kaya gagawin namin yung fraud. So why we are learning this? In one organization, business managers and accountants have the responsibility to become aware what are the factors and risks when fraud occur. Understanding this fraud triangle will help the company to have the ability to minimize the risk of fraud occurrence in one situation. 'Di ba? Kapag alam mo na ang mga rason sa mga bagay, kung bakit nagkakaroon ng fraud, pipigilan mo yon. You will make any way para maiwasan mo. So that is the importance of learning what is fraud triangle.
Good day, everyone. I am Princess Aubrey Almanyaska, and I will be discussing about the risk factors that contributes to the misappropriation of assets as well as to fraudulent financial accounting. Two types of misstatements are relevant to auditors' consideration of fraud, especially if the accused have an intention to deceive people. Let us go straight to the factors that leads the assets to be misappropriated. It is believed that the misappropriation of assets is maybe due to the theft of an entity's assets in relatively small and immaterial amounts that is usually committed by the employees. On the other hand, it can also be due to management's action of concealing the misappropriation in a way that it is hard to be detected. However, asset misappropriation can happen in numerous ways that includes embezzling of receipts. Embezzlement of receipts takes place when a person uses funds for a different purpose other than they were intended to be used. For example, payroll clerk who does not deposit the correct amount of employment tax and keeping the rest for himself. A bank teller who pockets the deposits and misappropriating collection on accounts receivable or diverting receipts in respect of written off accounts to personal bank accounts. These situations are under embezzlement because a certain fund was not used for its real purpose. Next is stealing physical assets or intellectual property. Stealing a physical asset is simply getting an asset without the consent of an authority and use it for your personal good. It can be done through stealing inventory for personal use or for sale and stealing scrap for resale. Stealing of intellectual property refers to robbing of people or companies of their ideas, inventions, and creative expressions like IP. There are four main types of IP: trade secrets that pertains to the secrets behind different professions, trademarks that consist of a recognizable sign, design, or expression which identifies products or services of a particular source from those of others. Copyrights means the legal right of the owner. Only those who has given authorization can use a certain thing. And lastly, patents. It is a title that gives its owner the legal right to exclude others from making or using or selling an invention for a limited period of years in exchange for publishing and enabling public disclosure of the invention. Also, causing an entities to pay for goods and services that are not received. If you can recall in our accounting lesson, there is a principle called revenue recognition principle that suggests the businesses to not recognize revenue until the service or goods are delivered and not recognize expense until the service or goods are not received. It occurs in situations like payments to fictitious vendors or what people call scammers and kickbacks paid by vendors to entities purchasing agents in return of inflating prices. Also, using an entity's assets for personal use, like using the entity's assets as collateral for a personal loan. The question is that what is the difference of embezzlement of receipts, stealing physical assets or intellectual property, and using an entity's assets for personal use? According to my own understanding, embezzlement of receipts involves money. Most of the time, the topic in here is cash, and the position and responsibilities of a person is also involved in here. Stealing physical assets and intellectual property encompasses satisfying the person, and the action was done through an urgent reason. Meanwhile, using an entity's assets for personal goods involves satisfying needs. Misappropriation of assets is often accompanied by false or misleading records or documents in order to conceal the fact that the assets are missing or have been alleged without proper authorization. The following are the risk factors. Number one is incentives or pressure. Pressure arises when an individual has a personal liabilities or needs, and he or she has an access to the assets of the company susceptible to theft to misappropriate those assets. Moreover, unpleasant relationships between entity and the employees with access to cash or other assets susceptible to theft is possible also to drive those employees to misappropriate those assets. For example, adverse relationships may be created by the following: known or anticipated future employee layoffs, recent or anticipated changes to employee compensation or benefit plans, and promotions, compensation, or other rewards inconsistent with expectations. Next is opportunities. Certain characteristics or circumstances may elevate the vulnerability of assets to misappropriation. For example, opportunities to misappropriate assets increases when the following exist: large amounts of cash on hand or processed, inventory items that are in small size or high value or in high demand, fixed assets which are small in size, marketable, or lacking observable identification of ownership. Aside from that, inadequate internal control over assets may also intensify the proneness of misappropriation of those assets. For example, misappropriation of assets may occur because of the following: inadequate segregation of duties or independent checks, inadequate oversight of senior management expenditures such as travel and other reimbursements, inadequate management oversight of employees responsible for assets, for example, inadequate supervision or monitoring of remote locations, inadequate job applicant screening of employees with access to assets, inadequate record keeping with respect to assets, inadequate system of authorization and approval of transactions, for example, in purchasing, inadequate physical safeguards over cash, investments, inventory, or fixed assets, lack of complete and timely reconciliation of assets, lack of timely and appropriate documentation of transactions, for example, credits for merchandise returns, lack of mandatory vacation for employees performing key control functions, inadequate management understanding of information technology, which enables information technology employees to perpetrate a misappropriation. And lastly, inadequate access of controls over automated records, including controls over and review of computer systems event logs. The last risk is the attitudes and rationalizations. Disregard for the need for monitoring or reducing risk related to misappropriation of assets. Disregard for internal control over misappropriation of assets by overriding existing controls or by failing to correct known internal control deficiencies. Behavior indicating displeasure or dissatisfaction with the entity or its treatment with the employee. Changes in behavior or lifestyle that may indicate assets have been misappropriated. And lastly, the tolerance of petty theft. Risk factors that contributes to fraudulent financial reporting. Fraudulent financial reporting encompasses purposeful misstatements, including omissions of amounts or disclosures in financial statements to deceive financial statement users. It can be due to the efforts of management to manage earnings in order to deceive financial statement users by influencing their perceptions as to the entity's performance and profitability. Such earnings management may start out with small actions or inappropriate adjustments of assumptions and changes in judgments by the management. Pressures and incentives may lead these actions to increase to the extent that they result in fraudulent financial reporting. Such a situation could occur when, due to the pressures to meet market expectations or a desire to maximize compensation based on performance, management intentionally takes positions that lead to fraudulent financial reporting by materially misstating the financial statements. In some entities, management may be motivated to reduce earnings by a material amount to minimize tax or inflate earnings to secure bank financing. Fraud, whether fraudulent financial reporting or misappropriation of assets, comprises incentive or pressure to commit fraud, a perceived opportunity to do so, and some rationalization of the act. For uh, incentive or pressure to commit fraudulent financial reporting have a possibility to occur when management is under pressure from sources outside or inside the entity to accomplish an anticipated and perhaps unrealistic earnings target or financial outcome, particularly since the consequences of management for failing to meet financial goals can be significant. Next is opportunities. A perceived opportunity to commit fraud may exist when an individual considers internal control can be overridden. Take, for example, the individual is in a position of trust or has a knowledge of specific weaknesses in internal control. Fraudulent financial reporting often involves management override of controls that otherwise may appear to be operating effectively. Fraud can be committed by management overriding controls using the techniques recording fictitious journal entries, particularly close to the end of an accounting period, to manipulate operating results or other objectives. Inappropriately adjusting assumptions and changing judgments used to estimate account balances. Omitting, advancing, or delaying recognition in the financial statements of events and transactions that have occurred during the reporting period. Concealing or not disclosing facts that could affect the amounts recorded in the financial statements. Engaging in complex transactions that are structured to misrepresent the financial position or financial performance of the entity. And lastly, altering records and terms related to significant and unusual transactions. And lastly, the rationalizations. Individuals may be able to rationalize committing a fraudulent act. Some individuals possess an attitude, character, or set of ethical values that allow them to knowingly and intentionally to commit dishonest act. However, even otherwise honest individuals can commit fraud in an environment that imposes sufficient pressure on them.
Hi guys, I'm back. In this lesson, we will tackle about the responsibility for the prevention and detection of fraud. So, sino nga ba ang may pinakamalaking responsibilidad in preventing and detection of fraud? So, we have two, the management and the government. So, let's first tackle about the management responsibility. They are the one who is creating an environment where fraud is not related. Instead, culture of honesty and good ethical behavior are observed. So, dapat sila mismo ang unang sumusunod sa mga batas na pinapatupad nila at nagiging role model nito. Then, they must identify risks and factors in fraud, and of course, they must take an appropriate action to ensure that controls are in place to prevent and detect fraud. Dahil dito, nagkakaroon tayo ng tinatawag na internal auditors. They're the one who evaluate the potential and probability of fraud, errors, or non-compliance, and also they're the one who review internal controls for effectiveness. So, ina-assure nila na yung mga pinatupad nilang mga controls or mga batas sa kumpanya para mawasan yung fraud is talagang epektibo, di ba? Then also, sila yung direkta nang nagre-report sa board of directors at sa council kung ano yung mga improvements at dapat nilang improve. Next, we will tackle about the responsibility of government. So sila naman yung nag-ensure na yung management is ginagawa nila yung task nila sa pagkakaroon ng fraud risk prevention. Then, they're also the one who understand and evaluates kung ano yung environment na meron yung isang kumpanya, ano yung best way para sa kanila para maiwasan yung fraud. At dahil dito naman, nagkakaroon tayo ng tinatawag na external auditors. They're the one who is responsible for assessing fraud risks within an entity and performing procedures to address those risks. Also, they are the one who is providing reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error, di ba? Kasi, ang external auditors, they are focusing on financial statement. Inaalam nila kung meron bang mali doon or dahil nagkaroon ba ng pagkakamali, dahil mali lang talaga, error lang, or dahil sa fraud. Even though dahil sobrang hirap ng financial statement, even though ayon sa statistics, there are only 10% na nadedetect ng mga external auditors ang fraud sa isang kumpanya. Ito ay malaking tulong pa din para malaman ng government natin kung may fraud ba sa isang entity. At sa mga nalaman natin ngayon, parehas lang silang may mabigat na responsibilidad for prevention and detecting the fraud. So dahil dito, dapat itong dalawang grupo na to, they must practice skepticism. Ano ba yung skepticism? Patuloy silang nagtatanong, patuloy silang nagsisearch ng mga kaalaman, ano pa yung mga best way and best procedures para mapigilan natin yung fraud. Also, they're the one na kailangan ma-maintain yung trust sa mga tao sa paligid nila, pero but verify attitude. Hindi lang tayo basta nagtitiwala sa management, hindi lang tayo basta nagtitiwala sa government, kundi dapat sinisigurado natin katiwa-tiwala yung mga pinagtitiwalaan natin, 'di ba? So, ang mahuling masasabi ko lang, fraud prevention and detection necessitate that an ever-changing multi-faceted process. However, even small steps to improve controls can lead to positive results. So, sa pagkakaalam natin for prevention and detecting of fraud, kailangan natin ng matinding pagbabago, matinding proseso na dapat patuloy natin ginagawa. Pero lagi natin tatandaan, kahit sa maliit na bagay, meron tayong malaking at positibong matutulong sa pagpe-prevent and pagdedetect ng fraud.